All right, let's finish up chapter 12 here, and this time around we're going to pick up with some suggestions for producing effective commercials. First off, know your audience. A reminder of something that we've talked about ad infinitum in our classes. You have to know your message, what is your message, and also be able to answer the question, who is your audience, and know that audience. Make sure that your script addresses the target audience and conveys the message in a clear fashion, in a way that they're going to receive in the way that you intend for them to take it and embrace it, so that they will accept it. Second, avoid gimmicks. A commercial that depends on gimmicks often has its essential message weakened. So what we're talking about here is that, if you're using hokey phrases, if you're trying to use different enticements that aren't really realistic in terms of the product or service that's being offered, come buy a new car and we'll give you a free corn dog or something like that. Who cares? That has nothing to do with the product or service that is being offered. Summarize the thrust. You should be able to clearly define the premise or the argument being made in a commercial in just a few words. We talked about this with the idea of how you write for the ear, that you want to keep things simply simple, that KISS method. You want to make sure that it's very easy to come away with the main point of what the commercial is trying to do. Fourth, don't blast the listener. Strive for bright technical quality, but excessive loudness and abrasiveness often detract from the message. So you want to have vibrant sound. You want it to capture the listener's attention. But if you're coming on overly forceful, if you're over-modulating, it's going to pierce in such a way that it's hurtful, as opposed to someone perking up and desiring to pay attention. Read the spot to the client, or better yet, play a good demo for the client. When someone can hear the ad, as opposed to someone just reading copy, whether it be out loud or worse yet, if they read copy silently, this proves that the spot is written for time, because some people don't quite grasp how much copy on a page actually takes in terms of length of time in order to read. If you're reading just in your head, we tend to read in our head a lot faster than what we actually speak. So you want to hear the ad. So when this happens, you get a better picture of what is actually happening, as opposed to just silently reading the words on a page. Sixth, don't force humor. If there's any doubt about whether a spot is funny, that means it's probably not funny. Also, be realistic about whether a significant part of your significant part of your listenership, will find the joke offensive or not. If there's any question, it's best to stay away from it, especially when it comes to commercial production, because we are looking to provide information to the consumer in such a way that it puts the advertising client in the best possible light that we can. And if you have any sort of content in the commercial, especially something that you're trying to be funny with, and it just winds up falling flat at best, or gets people angry or upset at worst, then those are advertising dollars that are not very well spent. Achieve high technical quality. Save copies of completed works and all production elements. And this is really helpful, especially if there needs to be a retake for one reason or another. There's a change in the wording of the copy that needs to happen, or perhaps there needs to be a different use of a different sound effect in one place or another. Whatever the case may be, if you have all of your elements kept together in one particular folder on your digital audio workstation, that you could just very easily open that DAW back up, open up all the elements and then just take the one element out and replace it with another, or re-record something that you need to, it's going to save you a whole lot of time, as opposed to recording something, saving it, and then having to re-record everything for one little change. Don't overuse a particular piece of music. At the very least, reserve a certain music piece for a certain client. This is important for a couple of reasons. We tend to associate certain sounds, certain music beds with particular companies. And this is true not just on a national basis with jingles and all that sort of thing, but it's also true of the local advertising client. And if the client has a regular advertising schedule where they are on the air quite a bit in particular, it benefits them so that if there's a particular piece of music that comes on the air, the listener over time will automatically come to associate that piece of music with that particular client. And all that does is help bolster and reinforce their branding and their message. But at the same time, you don't necessarily want to use that to overkill, especially if they have a really aggressive schedule. There might be some opportunities to use different types of music beds in light of maybe different products or services that a company offers. So you want to be judicious about that. Definitely don't use the same music piece for multiple advertising clients, because that can create confusion. You want to create a certain sort of brand identity with the music, but you also don't want to use that to excess in and of itself. Keep the message simple. Too many ideas in one commercial can muddy the whole concept of the spot. Again, that idea of coming up with the main premise, the main idea, and having everything within the commercial point to that one main idea. Avoid these 5 common mistakes in commercials. First off, lack of focus. The listener must be given a simple message that doesn't wander from idea to idea. That's another way of saying hold on to one main idea and have everything support it. Second, avoid poor technical quality. Take strong, anguishing pains to recut or redub a commercial when it doesn't sound as good on the air as it sounded in production. Got to keep in mind, when we're talking about radio, the quality of audio that someone hears over the airwaves is going to be different from just hearing the pure sound within a studio. So that's something that you have to consider. That might mean you have to tweak the volume levels on certain sound effects. It might mean that clarity of voice needs to be considered and re-evaluated depending on how something sounds on the air. So you want to keep that in mind. Third, you want to not have a lack of completeness. A message is more effective if it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You want things to be coherent. You want things to have a flow with them so that people can hear the situation that's being brought up, hear the climax point, the turning point, and the resolution, and have it all, again, come to that one main point, that one main idea, which is ultimately appealing to the listener to patronize a particular client. Fourth, the assembly line approach. Avoid it. Don't be cookie cutter. Now, the way that this happens is that if you... I worked at a station that did this, and it irked me to no end. That you might have kind of a template of sorts that says, come and visit insert name of business. Insert name of business has been in business for X number of years. Come join name of owner, and his dog, name of dog, and celebrate name of business. And if you do too much stuff like that, it's just going to fall flat because it all sounds the same. There's no differentiation. There's no uniqueness in presenting an advertising client. And advertisers want to stand out from their competition. If you're giving the listener nothing that shows that the client is different from everybody else, again, the advertising becomes ineffective. Finally, don't be afraid to experiment. Don't shy away from trying a new approach. There's still definitely a need for creativity when it comes to commercial production, and coming up with innovative scripts, coming up with ways to use audio and sound effects in ways that perhaps had not been thought of before. Those things are especially important and can help that distinction aspect when it comes to making an advertiser stand out. Now let's talk a little bit about copywriting. There's more detail in the book than what we can really cover in terms of notes here, so I would encourage you to read those couple of pages in the text and really kind of get into the meat of some of the things concerning copywriting. But in kind of a short treatment here, first off, you want to look for powerful words that communicate a lot in a short time. We want to keep our sentences short as much as possible. We want them to have a certain flow to them, but we also want them to perk the ears. It's not just enough to say that something is better than something else. You might want to use a different superlative that maybe a company is masterful at a certain type of thing, or that there's been several accolades given to a company about a particular aspect of their business. Use words that people understand, but use words in such a way that they stand out when you use them, because perhaps they're not used all that often overall, but they hold a significant meaning when they are used. Try to avoid modifiers whenever possible. What do we mean by that? We don't want to give like a lot of excuses, things like for the most part, or in many cases, or generally this happens, but not when this circumstance is about, and that sort of thing. Always avoid needless modification. You don't want to be overly verbose. Again, you want to keep sentences short. You want to keep them simple, but at the same time, when you make your word choice, you want those sentences to be profound. Stay with one topic. When writing a commercial, you need to relentlessly hone in on one feature and deliver benefit after benefit related to that one feature. You've heard that a lot as we've talked about it in this chapter and in past chapters. Stick to one main idea, and everything within that commercial production should point towards that one main idea. Be specific. Use focused words. Here's a couple of examples where we talked about using words to their advantage. There's ways that you can really drive home the point, at saying something like save hundreds of dollars as opposed to saying save a lot. It gives definition to what you're trying to say. Appeal to all senses. It's up to the copywriter to paint a visual picture that communicates the message quickly and cleanly. Try to give that picture when you use words of how something looks, how it sounds, how it tastes and smells and feels. Telling a story is painting a picture in the listener's mind, using emotional experiences they can relate to. So you can also appeal to all of those emotional triggers, and those things have a power to them just like the physical senses do. You do want to be careful of loading too much information into a commercial. Again, one main idea: less is more. So don't try to cram all sorts of words or all sorts of information into a 30-second spot or a 60-second spot. If you overload, try to say things too quickly, the message is going to get lost. Stories are an effective way to communicate a lot while saying a little. So think about how a story can be portrayed on radio using audio. You can make use of sound effects to prevent from having to talk with a bunch of words. It becomes more it becomes more interesting to the listener if they hear the background of city traffic as opposed to someone saying someone is stuck in city traffic. You get the idea. Not to mention, you could have dialogue going on in the midst of that traffic, and that saves precious time. Consider straight reads with bullet points. So what are we talking about here? A straight read from an announcer not only conveys the personality of the host, but cuts through much of the highly produced clutter that's found on the airwaves. This is kind of another way of thinking about less is more. Sometimes you don't need the music. Sometimes you don't need the sound effects. You could have the voice of someone that is beloved and trusted come to the microphone and talk about the product or service being showcased. And depending on the type and style of what is going on, perhaps there's opportunity for some ad-libbing here to make things sound not really like a commercial, but, kind of like, maybe you sitting at dinner with somebody and they're conversing with you about this thing as a friend, like kind of a word of mouth sort of style. So, maybe instead of writing an actual script, you give that person bullet points. And as long as they include the information in those bullet points, perhaps they could come up with something that is much more effective than what would be written on a page. Don't try to force words down the listener's ear with accelerated copy. Be sure that whomever is going to read the spot does not have to rush to do that. Again, it's a good idea to read your copy out loud after it's been written to make sure that it fits for time and that it's coherent as you read it to someone that is listening. Not to mention the fact that if you have to try to speed copy up, which you can do, there's features in the audio workstation software that allows you to do that, but it's going to definitely sound off. It might wind up sounding a bit chipmunky, or it could be that the words are sped up so much that you can hardly follow what's going on. And we tend to associate fast talkers with those that may be a little less than genuine as well. Edit, edit, and edit. Work on your copy until it is concise and it is polished. Now, we don't always have a ton of time to devote to making a piece of copy absolutely perfect, but the more time that you are able to spend to make sure you have just the right wording and just the right approach to how you're going to say something, the more opportunity that you're going to have to make that copy effective for the listener. Now, some applications in station promotion. Unless a station succeeds in attracting the attention of a significant number of listeners, the revenue it generates from advertising is going to fall off and the station will ultimately fail. So, if we're talking about a station that perhaps fits a certain niche or for whatever other reason might not have the highest ratings in the market, the thing of it is that it's hard to reconcile with that and to make that appeal to advertisers in some cases, unless you can really talk up the target audience that you have and show consistent data, even if you're not the best of the best of the best. One way to mitigate that is through the use of promotion. Promotion is a major tool in generating the listener interest that produces loyalty to a station's programming, because promoting yourself on the air reinforces the station and the identity and the branding as a listener is tuned in. In promotion, the elements of production are more central to success. The heavy use of effects and the punch that is added by the skillful blending of many different and often unusual sound elements is what attracts the attention of the audience. That's where you hear, many times, especially on rock and pop stations, you hear kind of the zips and the zaps as they tell you the call letters of the station that you're listening to. Even if it's not that high energy of a station, there's similar skills and tactics that are used in soft rock and in country and even in classical. Whatever the format is, there's ways to put its brand identity out there in a way that sounds unique, and you can capture the audience, to get them to pay attention to the fact that you're talking about your station. The copy used in promotional spots may be virtually non-existent. The only words in some promotional spots are in single spoken lines. We call these liners. They function as a slogan. It could even be just as simple as saying the call letters with various music and sound effects in the background. It could be just saying the station slogan, or whatever the case may be. The more and more, though, that you reinforce to the listener what they are listening to, the more that hopefully they will be able to recognize your station and your station's identity. The field of station promotion is open to so much experimentation and creativity. The key to becoming a successful producer of promotional production is to become well versed in the kinds of audio effects that can be produced with the capabilities of your studio equipment. This is where you really get to play with not just what is provided to you in the music library and the sound effects library, but being able to use various effects that are provided in your digital audio workstation. This is where you can play with echo and reverb and making audio reversed, and all of that sort of stuff. Playing around with equalization and making things sound higher or lower in pitch. All these things are very widely used in station promotion. No other area in the field of production offers more creative challenges and rewards to radio producers. And that's going to do it for Chapter 12. This is such a huge part of the radio industry, and you can even translate this to a certain extent when it comes to things like podcasting and other forms of audio production. It's what pays the bills. And the more that you can understand these concepts and you're able to make compelling content out of advertising and out of promotional material, the better you're going to be really in all sorts of audio production. So bring your thoughts and your questions when we come together in class to discuss this chapter.